There was a really bad smell in there, and it was a smell of something gone off. Now, we knew Barbara had lost all of her fingers, or most of them, and we had that terrible feeling that somewhere was something that we shouldn't be looking for, but we did go on a hunt.
In May 1984, in a sleepy village in rural Kent, a parcel bomb exploded in a 53-year-old grandmother's kitchen. It had been addressed to the victim, Barbara Harrold. The blast had blown off one of her hands, lacerated her abdomen and face. In the hunt to find the person who'd sent the parcel bomb that killed Barbara Harrold when it exploded in her kitchen, detectives had made startling progress. They discovered the post office it was sent from and a possible address for the sender. They'd also established a possible motive. A man called Keith Cottingham was in dispute with the Harrold family over a £600 property tax. In the last of the series of letters he'd written to them, he threatened to end his feud with violence. And for one detective on the case, the name Keith Cottingham rang a bell. In 1984, at the time of the bombing, D.I. George McQueen had been a police officer for 20 years. He began his career as a uniformed constable.
It didn't register with me at that time. Oh, I know this guy. I know this guy. And I wondered if it was that man that I'd met so many years ago.
Then it dawned on McQueen.
Well, bizarrely, I had met Cottingham in mid to late 60s when I was young police constable at Folkestone. Cottingham then lived in a bungalow a few miles from Folkestone. And as I recall, he was the secretary of the Folkestone Pistol Club. And there had been some complaints made from neighbours with regard to Cottingham. And I went out really to do a firearm inquiry to ascertain that he was obeying the regulations. And then he denied any wrongdoing. But he showed me what he did, and he was quite proud of the fact that he had gunpowder there and he could refill and make his own ammunition.
Fresh inquiries were made into Keith Cottingham. He'd retired some years before and had moved to Spain, where he bought the Harrold family's holiday home. Initially, police began to look into Cottingham's background in the UK.
He was the owner of a shotgun, and he was partial to making his own ammunition. And if he was in his garden and he saw a light aircraft flying over his garden, he considered that the pilot was trespassing in his garden. So he would go into his house, get a shotgun and fire a couple of barrels at the plane. Too high to do any damage, but very bizarre behaviour.
The police dug further into Cottingham's past. In the 1970s, he had worked as a pest control officer, and testimony from former colleagues gave a disturbing insight.
On one particular occasion, they had a job to clear a cemetery of feral cats. Their normal practice would be to catch the cats in a cage, and they would be taken to a RSPCA or somewhere like that. But Keith Cottingham would use a different tactic. He would dig a small hole, put a small explosive device in the hole, put a saucer of milk over the top, and wait for a cat to come and drink the milk, and then he would remotely blow it up. When I found out that he was rather partial to making homemade explosives, it became quite clear that Keith Cottingham was going to be our #1 suspect.
To make it stick, the police need something more solid. They needed hard evidence that would physically link Cottingham to the bomb that killed Barbara Harrold. Detectives checked the address Cottingham gave to a shopkeeper in the village the bomb was sent from. The address belonged to Keith Cottingham's sister-in-law. Yes, he had been staying there when the bomb was posted, but had returned to Spain before it exploded. Officers searched the house.
When I arrived there, both of the officers looked quite excited. So I said, "What have you found?" They said, we can't tell you yet, Gov. Come in the house." They took me up to the bedroom that Keith Cottingham had used during that week, and they pointed out something which was on a small sideboard at the end of the bed. And it was a roll of pink string. That's when I really got excited about this vital piece of evidence, because that roll of pink string, if it could be compared to the pink string we'd found at the crime scene, it would be very, very strong forensic evidence. And sure enough, the scientists came back to us very quickly and both the roll of string and the fragments we'd found at the scene were identical.